Welcome to Voices of the Learning Network. This is our next podcast. I am your host, Erin, and I have a confession to make. I am a famously bad packer. I literally start packing and shopping for trips months in advance. I have a 50-pound overnight bag, and then I notoriously forget many things. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because we have Michelle Perry Slater. She's here today. She's one of the keynotes of Connect 2023. Michelle is the director of Kios Modern Learning, and we are overwhelmed, delighted to have her to really start the chat, start the ball rolling about Connect 2023. Michelle, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for your time today. And why learning?
Well, I was thinking, why introduce with packing there for a moment? I was like, do you know what I'm like for packing as well? Why packing, but why learning? Why learning? I fell into it. Like many people, you don't put your hand up at school when the teacher says, what do you want to do when you're older? Is it doctor, dentist, train driver, teacher? No, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I did a broad-based degree at Keele University with a lot of subjects because I just didn't have my niche. I didn't really find out until I went and lived in Japan. And I taught English, and I realized that helping other people fills me with joy. So when I came back from Japan and got a regular job, I always ended up being the person that helped others. So new staff in, and eventually that role just became my role. I became the person who always helped the new starters. I became the person who was involved in people development, and I formalized it eventually and ended up in a global head of learning role before I set up Kairos Modern Learning 10 years ago, I don't know, a long time ago. And I love it because everybody can develop. We're never the finished article, ever. And so there's always the opportunity to support people in their endeavor to be a better human and be better at work and contribute to society that way.
That's fantastic. It's so interesting how none of us were like, I'd like to be a learning professional when I grow up. So the idea that helping, growing is the basis of what you do, I think that's just quite wonderful. So, Michelle, the purpose of our podcast today is to learn how to speak up. You are our keynote speaker. You're a speaker who people are clamoring to hear. But let's say I'm brand new. I'm just starting. I love learning, but I want to start speaking. As a beginning practitioner, where do I start?
So for me, it's about the story and the strength of the story that you have to tell. So firstly, I'd be really keen to hone that story. What is it that you're trying to get across? In my experience, people cram too much into a presentation. And what I always remind people when I help them to learn to be great presenters is that we don't know as the audience what you were going to say. We only know what you actually say. And the amount of times I hear someone saying, oh, well, I better hurry up because I haven't got time for that, or I was going to talk about this, but not today. That fills me with disappointment because I feel like I've missed something as an audience member. But actually, I didn't know you were going to say that in the first place. So honing your story and keeping some of it to yourself, like don't work out loud whilst you're on that presentation stage. Actually do that prior with your practicing. And I think that's my second top tip really is do practice. I was very fortunate that when I was on maternity leave with my eldest child, who's now 20 years old, I volunteered for Hearing Dogs for Deaf People, and they were looking for speakers. I had no experience at all. As a public speaker, I didn't really know what a speaker did, but I really supported the charity and wanted to support the charity. So they trained me to be a speaker. And what I found was that when you speak in a voluntary capacity, everybody has very low expectations of you. And it was a really, really fantastic way to hone the craft because I went along to, a women's institute or a scout group or the Rotary Club and talked to them about hearing dogs. And I learned how to kind of only have 5 things to say at any one time, because you can count those on your fingers. So I could remember my running order by actually physically moving my fingers into my palm, for example. And that way, it meant that I was kind of becoming this speaker, this public speaker, and understanding how to work the audience, how to engage with the audience, how to build rapport with the audience in an incredibly safe space. So my advice for anyone who's thinking about becoming a public speaker is go and do it on behalf of a charity, because you will be met with a warm reception. And of course, all of our charities need our help. They need us to do this work for them. So that's a really, it was a good grounding for me. And one year, I think it was the International Lions or maybe the Rotary Club sponsored Hearing Dogs. And I did about 35 talks that year whilst I was off on maternity leave with my son. So you turn up somewhere with a baby in a pushchair, with a hearing dog, a deaf recipient, and me. We were welcomed with cake and wine and all sorts. So it's a really good proving ground for learning that art. And I really did kind of get a bug for it. But that was different. Let's face it, doing it in that safe space to then starting to do it in a more public space around my work, that was tricky. So without advocates like Andrew Jacobs, shouting up for women and having women on the panels and having women on the center stages for conferences and things like that, then it does become tricky. So I'm curious how we can do that, how we can make that easeful for new speakers coming in. And personally, whenever I get the opportunity to speak, which is more and more frequently these days, I will always try and bring a younger person in as well, so that we have a broader range. And so I watch people like the 30 under 30 and see where we can kind of pull those, especially women, because it is difficult. It is difficult to, for example, ask for the fee. 9 times out of 10, if there is no fee, then there's a queue of other people behind you who are happy to take no fee. And that's very difficult. As a woman, even now, I'm better advocating for fees for my colleagues, my associates, than I am even for myself in my business. So these are the things that conference organizers need to address. These are the things that we as speakers can help people to understand and address. And of course, many times there are no fees. And I choose very carefully when I speak for no fee. If it's a charity, for example, or if we're furthering the profession, then that's a choice I will make. But if you're a profit-making organization, then, you really do need to accept that we're giving you your conference. And without us speaking, there would be no event. And so I've got a little bit tougher, but, I'm 15 years in public speaking, to do that. So that was a bit of a monologue, really, on apologies, on top tips, really, on how we can support other people to have a voice.
Listen, I'm taking away that you get cake and wine when you speak. So that's the most important point to me. But I think actually what you said just completely resonated with me. Sometimes when you're putting these submissions in or people are approaching you, you feel very grateful. I'm so grateful to have a platform. I'm so grateful to be on this podium. I'll speak. What do you want me to talk about? And forget like a fee. We're just so grateful. Whereas I think some of our peers go in, this is what I'm speaking about. This is what I expect. And I think especially as a woman, it's really hard to flip that script and to demand fee. This is my accommodations, and this is my conversation. This is what's important to me to talk about. So I'm going to pivot a bit. Michelle, why is it important to speak? Why, as an organization, as a learning culture, why should we care about speaking? Why shouldn't we just do our work?
I think that getting the stories out there is really important. One of the things I do and love doing is judge awards. And the reason I love judging the awards is because you hear the great stories. You really are on the cutting edge of what is happening in the real world. So although my business is a consultancy business, I want to stay close to the real world of practitioner. I try and always have a role on the go where I'm working within an organization so that I understand what is happening in learning and development. Because I don't think it's worth going along as a speaker without having the eye on the real work. And things like judging lets me realize what the real work is. Things like working within organizations on a practitioner basis let me see what the real work is. Sometimes I've gone to presentations and I've heard really inspirational things, and I've just thought, that's great for you in your massive corporate, but how does that work for me in my tiny SME? Or even vice versa. So I think it's important to speak, to share your story. And I also think it's important that people don't ever think their story's not worthy of being heard. Sometimes when we've judged awards, I love the ones that, we've been doing this for maybe 5 years. We've got loads of data to demonstrate that our staff are really engaging with it. They're the best stories because there's proof that they're working, as opposed to, we get many submissions. I finished the project yesterday and I've submitted for an award today. You have no idea whether that worked or not. Your story is not yet finished, or even partway through. So I think that telling our stories, sharing what works, thinking also then about how that resonates with your audience. So as a speaker, just telling your story, I don't think is enough. I think telling your story and relating it to how other people can learn from it is absolutely really, really important part of it. Case studies, often when I see them on a conference agenda, I just think, are they going to just talk at me about what they did, or are they going to talk at me plus relate that to how I could do something differently as well?
I love that, and I'm copiously taking notes because there's so much to take away from this conversation. When you are a speaker, what are you excited about speaking about? And I think it relates to what you're saying, but this is going to help me as a practitioner think about, where do I start with my topics? So what excites you?
I always look at the practical. I can't help it. It's just how I'm built. How can we do that in your organization? So I love having the opportunity to really interact with the audience, to hear their mini stories during the time that we're presenting and talking, to give them really practical takeaways. I think that that's where the most value is I'm always conscious that audience have either they've done one of two things. They've paid and given up time, or they've given up time to come and listen to you. So how rude of me to assume that that level of arrogance that I've got enough to say, that's enough for them. It isn't. Whatever I've experienced or whatever I can bring, it needs to be relatable for those people that have given up their time and or money. So I'm always keen that people can take something away. If they sort of go back to their office tomorrow, what would they implement? And that's certainly what I'll be bringing to Connect 2023 in November when we get together, for sure.
Well, since you mentioned Connect 2023, so I'm going to put you on the spot a bit. Now, you're a speaker, you're a learning expert. Can you talk to us about a moment when, and this is one thing that's so key with Connect 2023, when you reached out or when you spoke or when something didn't work out quite as you would have expected it? How did you work through that moment? One thing that Connect 2023 does is it offers us the opportunity to talk to anyone from CEOs, global head of learning, to another practitioner. But how do you overcome failures, those moments when it's not perfect?
One of the first times I ever did a work-based public presentation was in a previous corporate, and they were having troubles with the microphones all day. And it was my turn, and I stood up in front of a room full of mainly men. And there were not many people who were women who worked in that organization. And I tapped the microphone, and I couldn't hear it. And so, of course, I started with, am I turned on? in a room full of men. They just fell about laughing. It was so embarrassing. And in that moment, you've got two choices, because it could be anything that you say. You could be tripping up the stairs to walk on the stage. You know, in that moment, you've really got two choices: to roll with it and relate to the audience, or to blush red, be embarrassed, and the whole thing collapses around you. I rolled with it. And I just started with, of course I'm turned on. Why wouldn't I be? We're here in, I can't even remember what country we were in. We did these sales conferences every year for years and years. And so I think that you've got to expect that things won't always go right, and be the ultimate swan. You may be paddling underneath the water, but serene along the top. And those are the sorts of things that when I go back to my days speaking for Hearing Dogs for Deaf People, these are the things that you can sort of fumble and practice and learn from. I've stood there before and I've forgotten what I was going to say. I've forgotten what my sentence is. I expect it's going to be worse now. As a menopausal woman, I walk into a room and I can't even remember why I'm there now. So this is only going to be my reality moving forward. But we've just got to roll with it. And the ability to be that swan, I think, is a really important skill to learn as a speaker, even as a learning practitioner.
Well, I'm going to ask one more question again. This is a very selfish question. So how did you make the switch from a global learning leader to a consultant? Why and how has that changed your practice?
I had really, really supportive director in my global role. She really encouraged me to move and think broader and wider. We were the first company in the UK to implement a digital video-based learning platform. Back then, there weren't so many. I mean, you go to Learning Technologies now and there's billions of them. But back then, there was only one that sort of used video as its main application. And as a result of that, I got invited to tell our story on behalf of that organization. And that's really where I started public speaking from a business perspective, in an external business perspective, should I say. Obviously, been doing it for a long time internally. Within my profession back then was global mobility. So by moving and switching towards those engagements at, for example, speaking on the exhibition floor at Learning Tech, a lot of people sort of kept coming up to me and giving me their card and saying, can you help us? How did you do it? Can we have a chat? And my director at the time, she said, this is good for us. It's good branding. It's good external exposure. Go talk to these companies. And so I did have regular sort of hour chats with people just to tell our story, just to explain what we did and how we'd gone through procurement for a platform, how I'd got stakeholders engaged, that sort of thing. So I was actually doing that consultancy role without really naming it or knowing it. And eventually she said to me, you have a business right here. Like, this is something you could do bigger than us. Why don't you? And of course, I felt like standing at that cliff edge, and I'm looking down at the sea lapping the bottom of the cliff, and she's going, no, look up the sky. And I said, well, I'll jump, but I'll just do this until I fall and land at the bottom with a new job. And I'm still falling 10 years on.
I love it. Well, we're going to take a bit of a break from Michelle, and we're going to switch over to our Minute With. So we are speaking with Paula Hughes, one of the directors of the Learning Network, and here's her Minute With.
Thanks, Erin. So I've been a member of the network for a couple of years, and I finally plucked up the courage to stand for the board elections last year. And it's been a bit of a whirlwind since last November. I can't quite believe that so many months have gone by. Now that I've found my feet, it's so rewarding being on the board and getting to see all the hard work that goes in behind the scenes to putting events together, putting the newsletter together, putting the podcast together, keeping everybody engaged, making sure that they get the most out of being a member. But where I've seen great benefits to myself of being a director is the confidence that I've had serving on the board, and that's translated over into my day job, where I've been able to, put myself forward for more things and engage with like senior stakeholders that I wouldn't have been brave enough to engage with before. So if anybody's thinking about standing for the board, it is a really good way to forge an alternative career path if the traditional working your way up through your business isn't for you.
Michelle, I really appreciated our conversation today. I cannot wait to hear your keynote at Connect 2023. Any last words for the practitioners listening, our fellow Learning Network members listening? Anything that we can take away and really make our day brighter? I know, completely put you on the spot.
No, not at all. Just thinking there about my old director, Catherine Marlowe, a beautiful human being. I think two things. If you are already in a position of privilege, in a position as a speaker, in a senior position in learning, then don't forget to reach out to those younger or less experienced than you so that you can be that mentor, you can be that person encouraging somebody to fly. And if you're on the flip of that, if you're keen, if you're interested in becoming a speaker, then find yourself somebody who will have your back, who will support you and practice in a safe space. So for me, like I say, that was a volunteering space. It might be something different for you, but just go for it. What have you got to lose? You know, you might fall and trip up the stairs, but you can just make a joke of it and carry on.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. All of Michelle's links will be in our show notes. Also, I'm sure you're clamoring, you're packing your bags, but make sure you have your ticket. Connect 2023. It is going to be here before we know it. If you don't have your ticket, click below now in our show notes, get your ticket, start packing, do your shopping. And when we all forget things, we'll meet afterwards and we'll laugh about it. So Michelle, lovely conversation. Thank you so much for coming today. And remember, it's time to speak up.